So, I realize, as I'm now well over a year into making videos about Heroforge, that a lot of the most basic foundational tips that initially attracted people to my channels have been kind of diluted and spread out over a dozen different videos, and some of them are incredibly outdated. So I have decided to compile my absolute best and most important Heroforge tricks into one single informative top 10 video, and without any more annoying intro filler garbage, here you go. A running trend with a lot of these tips will be that the default options of Heroforge kinda absolutely suck, and those terrible baselines are more apparent than anywhere else in the initial proportions of a character that you create. This, the default character, looks like a child. Now, unless you particularly want to create a kid, or if you're really into chibi style characters, this default is probably not what you want when you make a model. So there's a very simple way to fix all this, and no, it won't increase the cost of a model even if you do want to print it. You pull up the height from its default up to somewhere between 6'10" and 7 feet, the latter being the max you can go to before a model becomes XL. After that, I recommend pulling down all of the weight sliders to 0 aside from arms. It might look like you're making a character particularly skinny, but once you start putting clothes on this, you will find that most items look extremely chunky if your weight sliders aren't at 0. And yes, even if you want to make a really thick female characters, I still recommend this. Just use the curve sliders and the muscularity sliders instead of the weight ones. You will thank me when you see that your boots are no longer shaped like buckets. There you go, options changed, and now your character actually looks like a hero, not a child. This is after all Heroforge. If you want more info on any of this, I do have a dedicated video on it with a lot of tips that still do hold up, even if the video overall is a little bit outdated. I'll put a link to it. Now, to stay on theme with sliders. Posing. Honestly, there is no way to briefly give tips about posing in Heroforge, and that's exactly why I almost have an almost 50-minute long guide about the full extent of this. So here are my extremely summarized quick tips. First, use the hand posing options. There is no bigger sign of a beginner or a rookie in Heroforge than someone who posts a model which has default hand posing. Now again, most of the default poses suck. Go into advanced posing and change things around. Pulling clavicles up and down particularly can add a lot of personality as well as reduce stiffness in a character. Turning a character slightly, either in the body or its head or both, goes a long way as well in delivering a little bit of personality and dynamic to the pose. If you are advanced posing, remember that the legs can't be edited. You are choosing a leg pose when you pick a basic pose. Everything else can be changed, so choose one that fits the pose you have in mind. You want to decide very early on if you want it to be an idle pose or an action pose, because again, if your character's legs are standing still but the arms are flailing around like it's a mid-action Aragorn swing, it really won't add up. Lowering a head slightly and having the eyes tilted upwards is a great way to make a character look like they are intensely staring. And as a final quick little trick, pulling up the confused and the cocky in the face sliders options is a great way to make a character smile in a way that doesn't look like the Joker with the default smile. Anyway, again, posing is by far the most elaborate part of Heroforge, so I can't go over all of it here, not even close, but I do have a video which goes over everything in detail if you want to see more. Baseline Heroforge characters look extremely silly, especially in the face. Now this might be fixed with Face Customizer, but right now the best thing that we have is decals. One of the main tips that I got a lot of attention for back when I first started out was simply using some of these makeup decals in order to add basic details to faces. And the gist of it is this: a default face looks blank and terrible, but if you slap down some eyeshadow in a character's eye socket, then copy the skin color, make it slightly darker, slap it back in, suddenly you have some depth to the face. Add on to this 1 or 2 layered stubble decals for facial hairs, a few scars, face the eyes in some direction, and suddenly you have a face which will actually look alive. And the same thing goes for a traditionally feminine character as well, only instead of stubble you might want to throw some more details onto the lips or add some blush or darker eyelashes, whatever you prefer, just use the 5 decal options. Again, I have a lot more details about tricks like these in my old face guide video if you want more. Colors! Just like before, the defaults absolutely suck. But, basically, the gist of it is this. You can edit your colors on 3 different layers, low, mid, and high. And, with a lot of different options on top of that isn't the color itself. But before I go any more in depth, the themes, again, suck. Never use these automatic Heroforge color themes. Never use them. I repeat, they are horrible. Now, the colors themselves are important, but I'm gonna focus more on the advanced options here. So I'll leave it to you to decide how exactly you want to edit these to make make the best version of a pure edgy black, haha. One of the biggest individual tips I can give is to learn how to simply copy colors rather than adding new ones. Whether you want slightly altered skin tones, or if you want to do the trim on a coat or make decal patterns, copying and doing slight edits to an existing color very often looks a lot better than adding a new one altogether. Anyway, the important advanced options are you want to lower the fuzz slider on all of the cloths. It's just turbo high per default and it looks terrible. You want to raise the roughness on things like, for example, hair, but you sometimes want to lower roughness on things like skin or metal. For example, if you want to make sweat or if you want to make something shinier and more pristine. The metal option brings a lot of vibrancy to color. Now, this is not just for metals. With low roughness, like most of the metals have per default, metal will look like, you know, well, metal. But if you pull up the roughness, then you can actually have a metal color look like a cloth, only the color will be much starker. This can be used for a lot of things. If you think a color is too faded as is, if you want a more fancy looking cloth, you can use a little bit of metal to make it look that little bit more vibrant. Some colors, like eyes, have special options because they aren't really normal colors, and on these I would, for example, recommend that you always lower the iris size to get away from the default gigantic baby eyes. Again, the defaults suck, like I said. Back on the normal colors though, darkening the low layer and the high layer at the same time of a color will make the material look both thicker and grimier, dirtier, you know, Darkest Dungeon style. However, you can have the opposite effect if you raise the high layer to a lighter version of the color that you're using on the middle layer, and that can make the material look fancier or more thin. Now, I did technically have an old color guide in the form of this video, but it is very outdated by now, and I will be making an updated one in the near future, so I don't really recommend you watch it if I'm being honest. Now, if you're new, you may have never looked at these, but the arm options of Heroforge are really fundamental to making some cooler models. Now, for starters, in these you can find some really cool special options, like for example the prosthetic hands, which can easily pass off as just slimmer gloves, something that isn't actually available in clothes as is. More than that, however, you can enable extra arms in this menu of Heroforge, and with these extra arms you can do a whole load of things. For starters, you can clip one arm into another by matching their posing together, and this is easier if you have Pro, but it is also doable without it. And then, by stacking these two arms, you can have not only two different weapons and stack them into one another to make custom weapons, you can also have two different gloves on the same hand. Maybe, you know, you want some bloodied wraps on a boxer's glove or whatever, I don't care, who knows. Of course, the most traditional and well-known tricks that you can do with extra arms is probably stuff like clipping an item into a body. You do this by posing an extra arm inside the torso and having it hold something, like for example an amulet or a piece of cloth, or to add some extra heraldry. You can use this to add all kinds of details, extra weapons, ammunition, trinkets, literal shields, add onto the armor, whatever. It's up to you, and it takes some practice to learn how to do this without it looking messy, but once you've got it, I promise you it opens up a whole new world of possibilities. In my old rookie mistakes video, I once said that you as a beginner should never pick pieces based on their names. Like for example, these old elven pieces. I mean, they look like they're plastic garbage, right? And there are far better items for an elf that aren't labeled accordingly. And that logic kind of goes for clothing and equipment in general in Heroforge. So what I mean by that is every year, the stuff that Heroforge releases goes up tremendously in quality. Just compare this old rapier to this new rapier. And for example, look at this rather old item, this actual club of a sword, and guess its name, longsword. This at one point in Heroforge's life cycle was considered a longsword. That's how far they have come. It's just a joke how bad some of these old items are. And not just the gear, but the clothes as well. Older pieces are often much bulkier and chunkier, and although there are some hidden gems among the old stuff, most of it is pretty bad and outdated. A classic example of this mistake is people who search for wraps around the hands for, you know, their barbarian D&D character, and then they'll put this on, whatever these gigantic Lego blocks are supposed to be. I don't know, but the real point I'm trying to make here is there's almost always better options, and I would very, very rarely pick the first thing you find when you search for something, because frankly the older options that pop up are generally just complete garbage. And on this note, you should also always bear in mind how measurements will interact with clothing. It can be cool to make a character look very muscular, or maybe you want your barbarian lady to be super thick, but then you also gotta remember how that's going to impact things like the overlayer skirt, which also morph into these weird gigantic UFOs due to said measurements. Now, don't ask me why, it's just how it is. To fix this, you'll either need to keep the measurements low or use double modeling, or, you know, just use lower layer clothing which don't interact in the same way. Horns, either hair or custom helmets. The amount of times that I've been making a D&D character for someone and I say, I might have to use some horns here, and they immediately start panicking that I'm going to be slapping massive dragon horns onto their pretty elf character, but no. What a horn looks like depends mostly on how you color it, and a lot of these can easily be turned to look like hair if you color them right. Now post them carefully into other hairstyles and you can add some amazing details. But more than that, the horn section actually does have some options which legit just are not horns, like for example these feathers, which are literally made to be slapped onto a helmet to add some extra detail. I always recommend using these, but really the good stuff starts when you get used to playing with them overall and you can start forging yourself some proper custom helmets with just horns alone. It is awesome. And I guess if you color them really weirdly, you can also clip them into mouths to make tongues, I guess. Anyway, whether you're a beginner or master, use them. The horn section is amazing. A lot of people use templates in Heroforge, whether it's, saving a batch of favorite poses for yourselves or making various character types with skin colors and measurements and scars already included. It can indeed save you a lot of time. I find that personally, however, I don't really tend to use poses or character templates very often because every time I want to make something new, I always want to truly personalize it. But what I do use and what I would recommend to everyone else to use as well is base templates. These are applicable with like 9 out of 10 of all the models I make. How ambitious you want to be with these kind of depends on you, and I do actually have a planned video where I will be showcasing my own collection of these as well as giving links to them, but the gist of it right now is basically make your own base templates with the proper colors. Streets, beaches, jungles, forests, fields, swamps, frozen lakes, tundras, whatever you want. If you have Pro, you can also take this to the next level and start making custom bases with decal kit bashing patterns, but honestly these ones I am not so big a fan of since it kind of takes away from the decals that you can later place on a character, although I guess it is nice to have some dried blood splattered on your creepy dungeon floor. Anyway, these will save you a lot of time and always give you a nice starting point whenever you make a new model, so yes, make some. I mean, I can't make a top 10 Heroforge tip video without mentioning tails. Okay, fine, so tails are a complete nightmare to pose, but honestly, even without much skill, you can use tails to add some really great things. Much like the extra arms, tails can hold an item, which you can pose into characters for even more detail. Tails can also add detail to clothing, like my favorite example, the demon tails angle through a character to create an edgy Dracula color. Or you can be like all those Dark Souls fans on the Reddit and just slap 18 fur tails all across a character's body for, I don't know, like extra detail, I guess. Like, in my opinion, it looks awful, but if you like that thing, then I'm not gonna judge. Have fun. It's probably no surprise that my ultimate #1 tip of Heroforge is to do with double models, and I know there's a huge portion of the community who actually hate the idea of having to awkwardly clip together 2 characters and all the annoying obstacles and rigidities that come with this. And believe me, I do wish that Heroforge would just find some ways to give us this kind of unrestricted layering without having to resort to double modeling to begin with. Just, being able to stack hairstyles and chest pieces in different measurements without being told that we can't because wah, it will clip or whatever. But alas, here we are. Point is, in Heroforge's current state, the only way to truly customize a character to the fullest extent is by stacking double models, not just for the face or the hairstyle or the beard stacking, but also all the incredible custom clothing and gear that you can create with it. Do you remember the issues I have mentioned before with how proportions can ruin clothing on characters like the typical muscular barbarian, for example? Yeah, if you have 2 models, you can fix that. You just put the chunky skirt pieces on the skinnier model and suddenly it fits as it should around the other model, which remains muscular. Single models absolutely can look great, and yeah, a lot of the time I agree, the stacked double models also look absolutely awful because people overexploit the layering to make clippy abominations, but when used correctly, there really is no comparison. These models are just better. And this is not even mentioning the special kind of unique races and proportions that you can make by combining different shaped double models, like making a true Lord of the Rings style dwarf with small stumpy legs combined with a big chunky torso disproportionately larger than the legs below. If you want more in-depth tips about how you can stack these models together and all the details of how it works and what you can do with it, I did make a video about that as well. Have fun, enjoy. So obviously this is a lot to go over in one video, which is why so much of it is brushed over quite briefly. Each of these tips all have their own builds and videos where I go over these tips much more in depth, but even in this video alone you should be able to get the gist of the fundamentals that I use to make my models and what I would recommend for you to make yours. If you found this useful, then please press If you found this useful, then please press like, consider subscribing, and if you didn't, you can press dislike and you can tell me how much you hate me in the comments, but whatever the case is, thank you for watching and goodbye.